This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. I'm your host, Darren McKee, and with me, as usual, is Adam Gardner.
What's up, cuboids?
We have a great show for you this evening. Adam is going to talk to us about vampires and tuberculosis.
Yes, that's right.
But first, with Halloween around the corner, I thought it would be a good time to talk about zombies. Not those scary brain-eating ones, though. The philosophical zombies, which are scary and can eat your brain in its own way.
Anything can eat your brain if they try hard enough.
There you go. Growth mindset. Philosophical zombies, otherwise known as P-zombies, yes, the P stands for philosophical or philosophy, are a thought experiment to explore the nature of consciousness. To give a broad overview before getting into the details, there are many different interpretations of consciousness, and the P-zombie was created to argue for one position on consciousness and against another. Chances are your beliefs about consciousness will heavily influence how reasonable or not you think P-zombies are. So let's find out. As you know, I like my definitions. What is it? Well, a philosophical zombie is a hypothetical being that is physically and behaviorally indistinguishable from a human, but lacks conscious experience. No qualia, no subjective awareness, no what is it like to be it. If you poke a P-zombie with a needle, it will recoil and say ouch, but it doesn't feel pain. So once again, it's not about those zombies you see in Hollywood movies and shows, but rather a thought experiment used to challenge physicalism, the view that everything about the mind can be explained in physical terms. And although he did not originate the term, the P-zombie is often associated with David Chalmers, who introduced the idea in his book The Conscious Mind, 1996. His argument goes a little something like this. The conceivability argument. Premise 1. It is conceivable that there could be a creature physically identical to a human, but without consciousness. All right, we'll go through these first, and then we'll come back to them. Premise 2. If something is conceivable, then it is metaphysically possible. Now, a quick reminder, metaphysics is about the fundamental nature of reality and the universe. So we have premise 1, we have premise 2. Conclusion. Therefore, it is metaphysically possible that there are beings physically identical to us, but without consciousness.
Okay.
The implication here, consciousness is not reducible to physical facts. Hence, physicalism is false. We'll unpack all this, but just as a little quick wrapping this up, Chalmers uses this to highlight the hard problem of consciousness, why and how physical processes give rise to subjective experience. So in this conceivability argument, several different moves were made. When people disagree, they sometimes disagree with the first premise, and sometimes they disagree with the second premise, and sometimes both. As usual, there are also weaker and stronger versions of this P-zombie argument, and I don't mean weaker or stronger in terms of validity, but in terms of how strong a claim they are making. We are largely dealing with the stronger claim in this segment. Those who find the P-zombie argument convincing are often influenced by several intuitions, primarily that a detailed understanding of the brain would still lead to the question of how the brain creates experiences and consciousness. Intuitions aren't really arguments, though, so let's examine those premises. So premise 1. This is the physically identical to people, these P-zombies, but they're not conscious. That means it acts the same and does everything else the same, all the way down to neurons and cells, molecules, and atoms.
Yep.
Does this make sense? Truly identical? As regular listeners will know, I'm a big fan of Daniel Dennett, and he has argued that P-zombies are incoherent.
Sure.
If a being behaves exactly like a conscious human, it must be conscious. The underlying point here is that consciousness is not a hidden essence, but a set of functional and behavioral capacities.
Yeah.
In other words, consciousness is not a special ingredient you just layer on top of all the physical things that are happening in your brain, taking consciousness out and adding it as you like, without any physical consequences. Another way, the idea of a P-zombie is a category mistake. Like asking what color Tuesday is. But Amy, it's a cute one, right? But Amy Kind uses the example of a counterfeit $20 bill made to be exactly like an authentic $20 bill. This is logically possible, right? We can understand why this could happen this way. Yet the counterfeit bill would not have the same value.
Well, depends to who.
Well, right. Well, so yeah. Well, it wouldn't, and yet it can, right?
Yeah.
So I thought, is this the same type of thing? Is this a fair analogy regarding consciousness and a physical body? The counterfeit bill is not legitimate because the state has not sanctioned it, even if people might mistakenly think it is acceptable currency.
Sure.
There's no government that decides which consciousness is real and counterfeit. No, but generally we don't really have that. So I don't think this is the same type of thing. I think it's a very tempting analogy, but I don't think it really does the work. As I said, you don't sort of add or take away the notion of like legitimate currency without having any effect on the currency in a way that if you took consciousness in and out of someone's brain, I think it would cause physical implications in that brain. Mm-hmm. Even if you could do such a thing, which I think you probably couldn't, at least not easily. Michael Lynch, on the other hand, agrees with Dennett, arguing that the zombie conceivability argument forces us to either question whether we actually have consciousness or accept that zombies are not possible. Mm-hmm. If zombies falsely believe they are conscious, how can we be sure we are not zombies?
Well, that's the problem.
Well, that's one of the problems.
Well, maybe you are and I'm not.
There you go. We'll get back to that. We may believe we are experiencing conscious mental states when in fact we merely hold a false belief. Remember, they're identical. They behave identically. So that means anytime you've heard someone else say, oh yeah, I'm feeling this and I'm conscious this and this and that, you think, well, maybe they're a zombie. And then to be fair, the same thing would apply to you. And you say, well, no, but my feelings and thoughts are different. You're like, well, no, because it behaves exactly the same. How could you differentiate? Mm-hmm. Thus, Lynch thinks denying the possibility of zombies is more reasonable than questioning our own consciousness. It's kind of which trigger do you want to pull, if that's the dichotomy you're being presented with. Put differently, the claim that no one has provided a convincing causal explanation of how and why we are conscious is very similar to the claim that no one has provided a convincing causal explanation of how and why we are not zombies. The latter undercuts the former as an argument in support of P-zombies. So this is just the first premise. Like, could there be something physically identical to a person without being conscious?
Yeah, I would argue no.
Right. I'm more of a no as well, but Adam and I are probably physicalists, and that's part of this too, right?
We both read Dennett. You more than me.
We're more like we both probably agree with him, because there are other people who read Dennett and don't. And
yeah, that's fair. I read Dennett and decided to go back for more.
There you go. Yes. I mean, other people are panpsychists, and they think consciousness is its own sort of special building block of the universe, and that's going to change how you interpret certain things. Okay, so premise number 2. If something is conceivable, then it is metaphysically possible. This is an odd move, at least in my opinion, and putting it in other words, which I think is still fair, but I don't think it helps the case. Just because we can imagine something doesn't mean it's metaphysically possible.
Absolutely. I can imagine going fast in the speed of light. I can imagine going back in time. Right. These may be possible, but it's very possible that they...
There you go. You can come up with your own examples.
Sure.
We can imagine a perpetual motion machine, but physics tells us it's impossible. I can sure imagine Superman, but a being with such powers is metaphysically impossible given the nature of our universe.
Fair.
So there's a bit of what's going on here? This is like a weird rely on, imagination or intuition. More broadly, tactically, like almost taking a step back logically, why would this be a useful approach, this premise, like even as a line of argumentation? Why would it be valid to rely upon our imagination to determine what is metaphysically possible? In some sense, yes, of course, we have to rely on our thoughts to think about things, and whether things or beings are possible in our universe is separate from our beliefs about it, right? This isn't, of course, another bit of a philosophical claim, but, listeners, you can do your own research there. So I think whatever you may imagine, that's separate from what is, right?
Absolutely.
Like technically separate, not causally in the sense of what you might believe. Additionally, there's the idea about whether consciousness is for anything or just something that is a little bit of an extra without doing anything, an epiphenomenon, as they say. If P-zombies are possible, then consciousness is epiphenomenal, a useless byproduct.
The main purpose of consciousness is to muse about consciousness.
Write books about it.
Yes.
Make some sweet bank. So that is one implication as a byproduct. But if consciousness doesn't affect behavior, why did evolution produce it? So this clashes with our understanding of natural selection and adaptive traits. This particular line of thinking requires a belief in evolution and the idea that evolution wouldn't create something that is so useless. The last claim is complicated because there are wasteful processes that happen all the time in evolution in terms of suffering or evolved traits. But that is because they usually pay for themselves, in the broad sense, on net. So if you can picture lots of little turtles hatching on the beach, many get eaten as they're trying to get to the water.
Oh.
Or the giraffe has a very long nerve that goes all the way down its neck, around its heart and back up to its head. This is very inefficient. Dawkins loved this example to show why intelligent design doesn't make sense. Like, why would you design this nerve to go around, right?
Because the watchmaker was blind.
There you go. Now, it isn't always the case that everything that, exists is because it's adaptive and therefore evolution made it so. But it does seem like consciousness uses up a lot of resources. And it should be doing something in the evolution point of view. I don't think one has to wholly hang their hat on this part of the argument to also reject the p-zombie thing. But I think it does at least lead some support for that. There's also the all humans are zombies paradox. This is what we're talking about before. If we accept p-zombies are possible, we can't rule out that everyone else is a zombie. This leads to solipsism, the idea that only I am conscious. Of course, then I could also be a zombie. There's that problem there. This is epistemically unstable and ethically a bit dangerous. So given I'm not a dualist, meaning I don't believe in magical soul-like things, or that consciousness is detached from a physical process, I think the p-zombie does not make sense and seems to have used up way too much time in the philosophical literature.
Including this analysis.
So we're nearing the end of this segment. I'm going to quote the Wikipedia article on p-zombies. The experience of pain, for example, is not something can be stripped off of a person's mental life without bringing about any behavioral or physiological differences. Dennett believes that consciousness is a complex series of functions and ideas. If we all can have these experiences, the idea of a p-zombie is meaningless. Dennett argues that, this is quoting Dennett now, when philosophers claim that zombies are conceivable, they invariably underestimate the task of conception or imagination and end up imagining something that violates their own definition. He coined the term Zimbos. These are p-zombies that have second-order beliefs to argue that the idea of a p-zombie is incoherent. So Dennett's formulation here is Zimbos think they are conscious, think they have qualia, think that they suffer pains. They're just wrong, according to the tradition, the argument, in ways that neither they nor anyone could ever discover. Zimbos are just as incoherent as zombies. So I think a lot of this rests on that first premise. If you think of like neurons firing in your brain is what leads to or correlates with consciousness, then if you are not conscious, there would be different neurons firing. And if you somehow took out consciousness, there should be also different neurons firing. It only works as if the consciousness, again, is a special thing that you can take in and out. The conceivability argument, some of you might have thought, does that sound at all like the conceivability argument for God? And it is a bit of the, well, if you try to imagine a perfect being, surely the being would be even more perfect if it existed. Therefore, it does exist. There does seem to be a sleight of hand here in terms of how other people typically think of logic. So I don't think p-zombies are a thing. I think this is pretty much the case for humans, that there aren't philosophical zombies. Yes. I don't think they make that much sense. This has been in textbooks, though, and it comes up all the time. And apparently a lot of philosophers still believe it. They either accept the first premise or the second premise, and not as many people are physicalists as I would hope. And maybe there's a bit of a, a science-y thing here where science assumes, like methodological naturalism, meaning we'll assume there's the natural world to then do our experiments, regardless of what it actually is. And that's how you make progress in science. And so somewhat in philosophy, I think sometimes a methodological naturalistic approach would be useful. Now, some of you listeners might be thinking, yeah, but what about AI?
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Well, with AI, we seem to have behavioral mimicry in some ways. Obviously not as a physical body yet, even though robots are advancing fast.
Yeah.
So AI can simulate human conversation, emotion, and reasoning.
Yeah.
And like a p-zombie, it can say, I'm happy or that's painful without actually feeling anything. Supposedly, an AI does not have subjective experiences. It doesn't see red or feel joy. It just processes inputs and outputs.
Yeah.
It does operate on rules and patterns, much like a p-zombie would if it were just a complex machine following algorithm. I think the complication here is that we are currently designing these large language models to act as if they don't at least use the words of having thoughts or feelings, right? They're kind of stamped out, beaten out of them in some ways, so to speak, because they don't want, like, I'm alive and I'm suffering in here, right? Which is very concerning when you read it, even though I think it's probably not describing a real feeling, but it's prediction. But there is a world in probably the not too distant future when an AI system will say such a thing, and it seems plausible that it's being experienced, or you'll have to do some sort of cost-benefit analysis of like, well, do you want to make as I say, a type 2 or a type 1 error? Do you want to be like erring on the side of caution or erring on the side of this? And it might be reasonable to then offer provisional rights, maybe not like as full moral persons, but as moral patients, much like we might treat an animal or a child or an elderly person who's disabled or something like that. So I think there's a world where something like a p-zombie again, being generous with the term to give it any weight at all, could be in our AI systems in a short period of time. But it's still not quite the technical definition because it has to be physically identical to a person. And if that's the case, then I think the conscious thing holds and it doesn't even make sense. But could an AI, again, functionally approximate what a human does say and so on? And how could you tell the difference?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I'd heard this idea before, but I hadn't considered the physical approximation. Obviously, if you treat a philosophical zombie more like a black box, you're talking kind of Turing test kind of stuff, right? Like I'm interacting with something and I want, and it seems human, but maybe it's not. So I used to be of the opinion that if something sort of passed the Turing test convincingly, then it probably had subjective consciousness, emotions, whatever. I'm not so convinced of that now, just because of what we've seen with LLMs, and maybe I'm moving the goalposts, but like I don't think that those LLMs are experiencing subjective consciousness in the way that we do. Are they experiencing emotion? I don't think so. Are they experiencing pain? I don't think so. Are they experiencing a subjective experience of some kind? Maybe. You could maybe argue that, but I don't know how to tell. I think there is arguably a way that you could perfectly emulate a conscious person, because a human can kind of do that if they have, say, a character, or if they're pretending to be somebody. For example, you can pretend to experience pain. You can pretend to have emotions. You can write a character that has that or whatever. But maybe there's going to be limits to how convincing that is to an intelligent person. So we're obviously going to run into problems of like, does this artificial intelligence experience consciousness? And then if we do get to a point where one does, we get to another case of, does this very intelligent artificial intelligence experience separate consciousness, or is there like one conscious intelligence that is simulating a bunch of different human intelligence or something like that? So there's a lot of stuff like this that you can dig in. And animals too. It's like, is an animal conscious in the way that we think it does, or are we projecting our experiences onto them? Do I think that this dog is smiling when it's just like doing something weird with its mouth? You know,
I think it probably goes both ways with animals, right? We give them too much, and sometimes we give them too little.
Yeah.
Also, when you're talking about humans simulating, it really depends what they might be simulating. So when you said a human like acting as if it's in pain, that's one type of thing. Which in their brain and body, there should be a difference between like actually being in pain and acting as if you're in pain.
Absolutely. But it depends how method you are about it.
Well, right. But if I was going to say, but if they're acting as if they're angry, then there might be like, oh, well, now it is actually very similar to being angry. And maybe you can't easily differentiate from the outside if you're doing some sort of test. And when you talked about AI, there is a world, of course, where the human consciousness isn't, in theory, the only game in town. Like the only possible mind space, or the only possible place to be in mind space. And so there could be a world where AI systems are differently conscious and more so in some ways than we are. I don't know how you might quantify like something that feels even more like something to be something, because I've always thought that metric is itself problematic. But that's maybe where the future will go.
Yeah, it's a question of, can you be intelligent and capable to the extent that a human is without consciousness? Maybe an alien could. Maybe an artificial intelligence could. I don't know. I guess we'll know when we see them. And will those beings claim that they are conscious? If they do, I'd be inclined to say yes, you are. But now we're kind of like, we're setting the test. We're setting the yardstick to a standard that we have. Are we imagining that they made it, right?
Yeah. Well, I think we've already probably had AI systems that said they're conscious, right?
Sure.
And we think they're not, but eventually they'll say it, and it seems like, again, you're going to sort of benefit the doubt type thing because you're not sure. But I was thinking, it's just, is there a world where, 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years, or pick 1,000 if you want, listener, where the AIs are like, no, we're conscious and you're not.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you little humans, you don't even understand yourselves. Let me explain it to you. Why you're not really conscious like we are.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully you don't feel all this philosophy has sucked the life right out of you, because we still have to talk about vampires and tuberculosis.
Yes, that's right. Vampires as a myth have been around for a very long time, but the modern image of them isn't quite as old. That dates back to around the 19th century, which is when a New England vampire scare had people digging up graves and performing various rituals on them to make sure they didn't rise from the dead and drain their life force.
Sounds like another great example of the good old days.
A vampire is, from the Wikipedia summary, a mythical creature which subsists by feeding on the vital essence of the living, usually in the form of blood. Early cases of mass hysteria related to vampirism in the 18th century, those originated mostly in southeastern and eastern Europe. The cases I'll talk about today related to tuberculosis, or consumption, a disease that took the lives of many families in New England. So that's the northeastern part of the United States. This includes Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Vermont. There's more, but that's where these cases are mostly focused. Patients struck by the disease would lose weight, cough up blood, have their skin turn pale and gray, and often slowly die. This predates the germ theory of disease, which basically explains why microorganisms such as viruses and bacteria can cause illness. Tuberculosis is a bacterial respiratory illness. To an observer with no concept of bacteria, they see patients who have an illness which drained their life force and then died. And then somehow their family members would be afflicted by the same thing and then die themselves. They would have been healthy when that person died. So how could one prevent such a thing from spreading? Good hygiene, antibiotics, isolating the patient from healthy people? There's no framework for such ideas because they don't understand that it comes from germs. The assumption was instead that the dead were returning to attack their loved ones, draining them of their life force and continuing this vicious cycle. It's easy, of course, to cast this as being absurd through a modern lens, but if you really have no concept of a bacterial infection, what is the explanation for how this illness, which occurred to someone who is dead and then strikes someone who may have been healthy at the time of the person's death, really be? The solution? Obviously, you exhume the corpses and make sure they aren't able to return and attack the living.
I mean, the logic's clear.
There is some logic to it.
Yes.
Based on their prior assumptions.
I did not want to seem dismissive. If anything, I'm sympathetic. Like, wow, without the germ theory of disease, boy, would the world be confusing. And then you'd come up with all sorts of things to try to make sense of it.
Yeah. So here's a specific example. March 1892 in Rhode Island, Chestnut Hill Cemetery in Exeter. Locals dug up the bodies of Mary Brown and her 2 daughters. They had died of symptoms consistent with tuberculosis. The father, George Brown, was still alive and his son, Edwin, had fallen ill. The mother, Mary, and 1 daughter, Mary Olive, 20, had rotted away, but Mercy Lena, 19, was deemed to be oddly well preserved. Evidently, I can't comment on the state of the bodies because I haven't seen them, but there could be any number of reasons for this. The claim was that her hair and nails had grown and that her skin still contained drops of blood. The conclusion they drew? Mercy Lena was a vampire. A village doctor said the cold New England weather could have kept her body well preserved. The voice of sanity. Let's ignore him. Indeed.
That guy says we should wash our hands. Let's get him.
Yeah. Well, he probably wouldn't have said that, but...
no, but that also happened to Semmelweis.
Indeed, if she had been buried later than her sister and her mother in colder months, that would explain why her body is generally more well preserved. So her heart was removed, but the mob would not listen to this doctor. Her heart was removed and burned. The sick son, Edwin, consumed the ashes in a ritual, but he still died a few months later. So this was 1892, and 5 years later, in 1897, Bram Stoker published the novel Dracula, which serves as the inspiration for modern vampire stories. So this is one example, and there were a lot of other similar stories. I saw one from 1890, I saw some from the 1850s, and one from 1790s. There have been over 80 documented cases of vampire rituals in New England. In Maine, they flipped bodies over. In Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Vermont, they burnt hearts, as with the Brown case. 29 skeletons in Griswold, Connecticut, which appeared to have died of tuberculosis, had been rearranged into a skull and crossbone pattern. And it was around this time that the germ theory of disease was discovered and researched, so that by the time the actual cause of tuberculosis was uncovered, such practices and beliefs became less common. So they basically stopped doing this when people knew better. Good for them. So it all seems silly in retrospect, but not having a full understanding of a communicable disease is not unheard of. Even during the recent COVID-19 pandemic, there were changing recommendations and beliefs as the years went by, as well as disagreement among experts and lay people about the best approach. We weren't digging up corpses for being vampires, but there was still a variety of beliefs amongst people who, for the most part, believe in underlying concepts such as the germ theory of disease and that a virus was the cause of the respiratory disease, which took the world by storm. There are people that maybe don't believe in those things, but those are a very small minority. Modern vampire stories are the stuff of fiction, scary stories which make a nice backdrop for a book or movie. But not all that long ago, people who didn't understand the world as we do found such ideas to be plausible. Let's be glad for advances in science and medicine that have taken place since then.
Thanks, Adam. I find these segments both illuminating and kind of disheartening altogether, right?
Sure.
And I like how it makes more sense of things because people weren't acting completely irrationally. There was a certain logic based on the information they had. And it seemed to be 1890s. Germ theory disease was earlier than that, but it hadn't reached everyone, of course.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, it still hasn't, even today, right? Just people on
Sure.
Earth that don't believe these things. So, to be sympathetic in the broadest sense. But I was thinking like, oh, Darwin was like 1859, right?
Yeah.
And then Pasteur is doing his stuff, 60s, I think late 70s, 1870s is when he proposed his theory. But, things take time, right? Even now, things take multiple years. And that would be just so revolutionary. It'd be hard for other people to assimilate because it does require the science versus stuff you can see.
Oh, yeah.
Like there is you can see how people get sick because of a germ theory, but it's not like you can see the germs.
Yeah.
And so it would be harder if you don't have your own microscope or everything else. So it's really a change in one's worldview.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that, I was sick recently. I understand it was a virus I got maybe from one of my kids and all these things happen. I got bronchitis from, but it's hard for me to visualize it. It's hard for me to really understand it. Like, when exactly did this happen? How exactly did this go? Well, yeah, and then the virus moves from here to here. Like, how? So yeah, it's because they're invisible things that our bodies are not evolved, our minds are not evolved to wrap our heads around. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Infectious disease and ignorance. Now that's some scary stuff for Halloween. Thanks for joining us once again, listeners. Today we talked about philosophical zombies and why at least Darren and Adam think they don't really make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
And vampires and tuberculosis. 2 good Halloween costume ideas for you to consider. Until next time, think better, tack better.
Peace out, cuboids.
Happy Halloween.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Outtakes.
All right, there you go. There's a solid zombie segment.
Good.
Zombies raising the dead.
How can we go from zombies to vampires?
Well, I mean, there's an obvious one, but I'm like, what is it though? Zombies. I guess it's still the undead and the vampire is undead. No,
A vampire's undead. They're both undead.
well, but
Except a zombie doesn't think and a vampire thinks.
what is a
vampire
zombie-
also doesn't have a soul, which isn't a real thing, so it doesn't
neither
matter.
is a zombie. That's funny. Which doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
I guess a zombie
I'm saying a
does-
zombie
So
approximates
a zombie,
thinking.
depending on your...
zombie approximates thinking.
Yeah, and zombies sometimes retain memories, whereas vampires usually do and retain your full sort of conscious mind. But if a vampire has no soul, perhaps it's a philosophical zombie.
Right, here we go. Something like this. You can now decide if any of those are worth keeping.
Whatever.
Or not.
Put them in the outtakes, or
There
we
you
can
go.
keep in the show.